Welcome, welcome everyone to this episode of the Expansive CEO Podcast. I'm your host, Hannah Chapman, and I'm here with my co-host, Lauren Ammon. Say
Hi,
hi.
friends.
And we are here to, really talk about, we need to have a fuller introduction, I think, just in general, um, to talk about how to build a business that is in alignment with your true self and who you really are. And also, a business and a life, all of those things that just really come from within,
Yes.
align with who you are, align with your purpose, align with what you actually want to do in life and how you're here to do it in your unique way. And so that's where we bring in the human design aspect, the gene keys aspect. And then kind of today, we're going to talk more on the money stories aspect. And we're not necessarily going to go business side today, where it's actually absolutely affects business. But this is a little bit more into the personal money story side. Yeah. And it's a heavy, I wouldn't say heavy topic. It can be. We're not going to make it fun necessarily.
You don't know that. This is us. We could make this so fun
That's
in the
true.
moment. You never know what's going to come out of our generator energy. So,
That's so true. Okay. So Lauren, do you want to kick off our topic for today? Do you have it? Or do you want me
yeah.
to read it?
Well, I mean, yes. I also want to add that, the business and personal are never mutually exclusive, right? So we talk about building a business, though, even if on the personal side, those two things are always interconnected. And
Mhm.
it's kind of, that's also the beauty of our message is that building a business, whether you're building a business, whether you're in the business, it's all personal. It's all personal to you. You bring your whole self to whatever that you're doing, and so these topics intermingle, and they cannot be separated. And if we do, that's what I feel like. Sometimes when we separate them, that's when it's like, how do we all bring this together? But today it's talking about why does no one prepare you for the financial implications or the financial considerations of divorce, death, or inheritance.
Uh-huh.
And I think we both have quite a few opinions on all of them.
Yes, opinions and deep experience.
Yes, a grounded experience for sure.
Yes, and there's such important topics. And to your point, I was going to say that exact same thing. That um, it's when we try to separate, that it's not personal, it's business. This is a business decision. It's not about this and that. When we really do separate that out, we cut off part of our humanity.
Yeah. Yes.
And without that meaning, it doesn't mean you don't make hard decisions sometimes, right? That doesn't mean that you never fire an employee. It doesn't mean you never have a hard experience, when you realize that business is personal. It's that when you cut off part of your humanity in order to fit into a business mold, that is exactly the experience we are looking to move away from generally.
Yes.
It's just with business, with life, I will never do business that way
Oh, yeah. Never.
ever. And so, yeah, and it was, realizing where I was doing that, where I was masking, where I was being something other than who I truly am in order to fit into a business mold. That was when I realized I couldn't do that. That's why I created X squared. That's why I left. That's why I went independent. All of those things.
Yes.
So, anyway,
First soapbox
yeah,
dismantled.
we'll put that soapbox aside. But yes, divorce and inheritance, right? Those are the main topics of the day.
And death.
Um, yes, death being in there. Usually that's part of inheritance as
Yes.
well. Not always. And that's the hard part too. I mean, from my own personal experience of my dad passing away, there was no inheritance. There's nothing. And so, but there were a whole lot of implications
Yes.
still to
Yes.
deal with. Um, and so, yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about why no one prepares you for these things. First reason is super obvious. It's because nobody wants to. Nobody wants to think that they will pass away early, or that their spouse or their business partner will pass away. And I will say, if you are in a business partnership, like a legal business partnership, where you own part of the company, your partner owns part of the company, if you do not have this stuff in place, it is even worse. It is even worse than if you're from a administrative logistical perspective for most people, than if your spouse were to pass away. Like, it is an absolute nightmare. And so this is a warning, again, not from thankfully not from personal experience with that, for me, but having seen
Yes.
the fallout as an advisor to business owners, it's very, very, very difficult
Yes.
to deal with if you do not have succession planning in place in your business. And again, like, yeah, that's the number one reason people just don't want to think it could happen to them.
Yes. Divorce included.
Divorce, yeah, absolutely. Like, that's the narrative around divorce as well, is that you don't talk about it, you don't plan for it. It's such an emotional charge, and especially with divorce, the person is still alive. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a divorce, right? So, like, you're still alive. You still have to, in a lot of cases, especially if you have kids, you still have to deal with each other. You have to have some sort of relationship and communication, however that looks like. So that one, yeah, it can be super difficult. And you just don't, again, people don't want it to be something to be true, that they might have to go through that
Yes.
in their lifetime.
Yes. And this notion, this almost like collective limiting belief or money story, however you want to categorize that, is that if you plan for it, or if you create a structure that might allow that action to be a little easier if it were to happen, is this like, well, why would you plan for it? If you plan for it, so then it's inevitable that it's going to happen, right? It's like creating the self-fulfilling prophecy is kind of like, it's when a limiting belief could become a self-fulfilling prophecy, or the other way around. I can't quite
Yeah.
figure that out in
Yeah.
my head right now. Um, but that idea that if you plan for it, you know, then you're already thinking could happen. Well, yeah, I mean, that's part. Having gone through my experience, it's kind of like, I look back on it now. Listener, for any listener, I'm recently divorced. Um, Looking back on it now, I wish someone would have said, not plan for a divorce. That's not the language, but like, be more intentional about how you connect your finances, or consider having something specifically just for yourself. As you go into this, or talk to someone like a Hannah before you enter into marriage, in order to truly understand the landscape of what you're getting into.
Uh-huh.
Because it isn't just two people coming together and living a beautiful life, and building a family or a legacy, or something together. I mean, yes, that's truly the heart of what it is. But like everything, there are real life implications of what two people coming together actually means.
Yeah, and that's, um I think we've talked about this on the podcast before. That's where, especially if you have built something already, if you're a business owner and you've built something, or if you've been working for a long time and you have, good amount of retirement savings, or if it's your second marriage, right? And you have maybe you bought a home, anything, having a prenuptial agreement is really a great tool to help do this. I had a mentor, um, that it's such good advice, and I like to keep it in mind and share it. And it's exactly in this frame of, plan the end, right, from the beginning. And this is granted, this is easier to do with a business partner than it is a romantic partner. Just putting it on the table that I understand that this can maybe be a weird conversation with a romantic partner, but plan with the end in mind. That if things were to go to the point of like, this doesn't work anymore, we're growing in different directions, we want different things, um, or we've made, irreversible mistakes that one or the other person can't deal with, that you create a framework for that, or a framework for understanding from the very beginning. And, thinking about that the first time that she said it, I was like, yeah, that makes sense, but it also sounds really hard.
Y Yeah.
Right. And then having been through a couple of different different partnerships that have moved through different cycles for different reasons, right? Like that wisdom came back fully. I was like, that was actually really good advice, to be able to uncouple from something with grace
Yes.
and with compassion and with understanding, to the best of your ability in that moment.
I mean, absolutely. Everything comes to an end. Like, and I don't mean to be morbid or pessimistic in that respect. It's a true fact of legitimate life that everything comes to an end. If you're thinking about a relationship as an entity, as its own kind of life force in and of itself, it will come to an end one way or the other. Whether you consciously choose to separate, or in the event that, one of the partner's lives comes to an end, you're now that life force, that entity, that relationship has come to an end. And somewhere in the history of humanity, we put this um, dark cloud around this idea of a prenuptial agreement. And again, I can see this now from a much more logical, much more objective point of view than had you presented this to me in 2009 when I got married. I'd have been like, "The hell are you making me sign this for?" But or that wasn't part of our agreement, right? Or had I asked my now ex-husband to have signed one, that we put this dark cloud of organizing something as part of an agreement as a bad thing, that it takes away from the love or the understanding or the companionship or the connection of a relationship. And it's kind of like we were talking about at the beginning, is that it, on the almost on the opposite side, that these relationships, that there is a very romantic and beautiful part of it. There's also a very human part of it, right? And you've got to look at, or at least be open to consider, the very subjective and the very objective part of a relationship, whether it is romantic or business, so that you're bringing two humans together. You're now creating this new life force in this entity. Yes, there's going to be emotional things about it. There are going to be mental things about it. There are going to be spiritual things about it. And there's going to be very, physical things about it. In taking something with that mindset of keeping the end in mind, if you come into that relationship or agreement with an open mind, with clarity, you can create something, an agreement that can be rooted in love, whether it's romantic or platonic or any variation of love, to have clarity and objectivity. Because by the time you get to the end, let's say it is a chosen end, clarity is probably not part of the equation.
Right.
It's most likely that there are very big emotions involved. Let's use a divorce. There are definitely emotions involved. Even if you're having a very amicable divorce like I did, there was still a lot of emotion involved. In clarity wasn't necessarily always on my side when I was trying to make very important decisions, not just for the current day, but what it meant for the future of me, for the future of our kids, for the future of us as a co-parenting partnership, right? I'm forever connected to him. And thank God I enjoy him as a human being, because if I didn't, then, Lord, that would be tough. But to start at the very beginning would have been a lot easier than it was at the end, when there was so much emotion. And it was emotion for myself. It was emotion for him. It was emotion for the end of the relationship. It was emotion for our kids. It was emotion for how this affected our network. It was an emotion. I mean, just like think of an emotion, and it was there. And now looking back, my third line being like, oh, yeah, I could see where that would have been really, really helpful in the very beginning.
Yeah.
But even if you can't get past a prenuptial, maybe there is this very emotional block, is to sit down and really have an open conversation of how do, how do you want to approach our money together? Or how do you want to approach our assets together? Could be life saving in a lot of ways.
Yes. And that's I like that we're here first, right? So with divorce, um, because I'm, currently talking with a prospective client who that is what prompted the conversation in the first place. And she and her husband did spend, decades together and built essentially his business
Hmm.
together. She is brilliant and a consultant and does amazing work as well. And she used her brilliance to help him build his business to the point where it was worth a lot of money. And in the divorce, there was so much resentment and so much, in the division of assets not being super clear and all of the investments that they had made together, like kind of like pulling that apart as to how do we do this fairly. And to the point where, on the backside, she doesn't necessarily feel now that the assets have been divided. She doesn't necessarily feel that it was fair now looking back, but she didn't understand exactly what the lawyers were doing in that moment. She can only look at it now. Again, being an extremely smart, intelligent woman who's knowledgeable about finances, but the process was too opaque for her to understand it in that moment. And again, it's like, yeah, how do you have an advocate for you in that process instead of coming to the table afterwards, in the cleanup stage, right? Like, okay, well, that would have gone easier if XYZ had happened, you know, 1 year ago at this point. Um, but it's not, it's done now.
Yes.
And it's really hard to have had to like pull apart a business and a personal life.
Yes.
And honestly, I've mentioned this before. It's a very interesting niche, that micro niche within, who we work with, is two business owners or spouses who own a business together.
Hmm.
or in the process of their relationship have built businesses,
Yes.
right? That is, I don't know how many of those humans exist, but they tend to find us. Hi, we love you. Um, because it is complicated and it's a lot. It's a lot of conversation um to have and to be able, like, that's one of my gifts, is that I can hold space for that conversation,
Yes.
right?
1000%. You're one of the very few people who I can see in the moment of being able to hold that conversation, even when it's really
Yeah. You've
yeah.
been there.
Yeah, 100%. And it's a gift. Being able to watch it from the outside because again, having gone through it myself, you don't know in that you need it in the moment, but it's almost as if you're just clinging to as much normalcy as you possibly can, that it's like you can't see outside of it. And again, it's like to have somebody who has the clarity, who has the objectivity, and who can be like, "Oh, hey, like consider this or you think about this." And you and I had those conversations, when I was going through it. I can hear it logically. To execute it as a human is also really hard. A- and it might have been easier had there been something set up at an earlier stage when the emotions weren't so incredibly high or low,
Yes.
depending on which way,
Active.
however you want to look at it. Um, but I mean, that's what I keep going back to is that uh, if you can come together at the beginning of any partnership with love and understanding and openness, with a tinge of objectivity and logic to say, can we at least set some sort of foundation and be on the same page now
Mhm.
so that in when it ends, because it is a when, it, not necessarily how, right? It is a when that we can take care of one another in a way that honors both of us, if the end so happens to be that we choose it and we have to disassemble our lives from one another.
Yes, and so the question that's coming up for me in that is, okay, well, we didn't do that. We didn't do a prenup. That was not a thing, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
even my husband and I were 21, when we got married, right out of college. We didn't have a prenup. We didn't have anything to
Right.
to declare, quite frankly.
Right.
Um, but okay, so you didn't do that. That ship has sailed. You can't do a prenup because it's not pre anything.
Oh,
Uh,
God.
so what do you do?
Yeah.
And then that is exactly what you're saying. My recommendation would be sit down and really understand, open up the finances and see everything. I will highly, highly recommend that you do this with a skilled financial advisor, whether that's me and our team or someone of your choosing, someone else. Right? Like, sit down with someone who is skilled at asking the right questions and opening up the discovery of what is there. And so, it's very interesting how often um, spouses don't really know what the other has, even when it comes to retirement funding. And if you have set up, a yours, mine, and ours, we've talked about that before. You have our joint finances, and then you each have your own thing, a little checking account or other funds, which again, I advocate for, I think is a healthy way to set up your finances so that everyone has We understand what the household needs together, and then we each have financial autonomy in some ways as well, right? Like a healthy balance is really important. But so often I see spouses who just have no idea
Yes.
what the total picture looks like. Um, and that's where a lot of anxiety lives. That's where a lot of resentment lives. That's where a lot of, feeling like I would never be okay on my own might live as well. And putting it out into, like for example, we use e-money in my financial planning practice. All the stuff goes in e-money. Every single account. We see it all. Every liability, every asset, house, cars, boat, whatever, business, everything goes into the software. So it creates something where you can see the ecosystem. What are you saving? What's going from here or there, right? Like let's actually put it out into a document where you both can see it. And we're going to talk about it together and just have clarity. And so, I mean, I'm going to have other couples that I work with that have been on the brink of divorce, right? And that's one of the first questions comes to me. Hey, we're thinking about separating. What would that look like? How would we do that? And, that's a conversation that we can have because we can see everything. It's not amorphous. It's not, you know, uh, there's nothing hiding financially, we'll say, which is such an important aspect. And what's interesting, um, in the case of the particular couple I'm thinking of, like going through some of that process of like just being really open and really clear actually helped them like come back together. And so divorce didn't end up being the answer for them, which great, right? I don't have an opinion. I truly don't have an opinion either way from my professional standing of whether that's right or wrong. It truly is. It's my job as a fiduciary, as a CFP, to take care of, especially if I'm working with both clients, to take care of both people and make sure that everything we're doing is as fair as possible. Always, like that's the goal. Um, but it's so interesting how if you can come to the table for that conversation and there's willingness to come to the table for that conversation. I don't know. You don't know what the outcome might be on the other side. And then in other cases, yes, the divorce was the right thing to do. I have another client who's finishing up finally and like finishing up what's called a QDRO, qualified domestic relations order. And that's the QDRO is the divorce order that pulls apart retirement assets, right? So if someone did most of the retirement saving and someone did most of the child rearing, right? They split the retirement asset. But if you take an early distribution, then that's taxable and penalized and all of that. So the QDRO is what does the separation and says, okay, this is now spouse A and now spouse B gets their half and it can go into an IRA account. Usually is typically what happens. And so that's what we're waiting on with this particular client. And, we've been through the process together for quite a while now, right? She's been a client of mine for a couple of years. And it's actually taken a couple of years, a long
Yes.
time to
Yeah.
get all the way through the process. And now we're just finishing up that QDRO, which compared to um, this other prospective client who has already been through it and it was messy on that side, right? It was different to be in that process and be like, hey, what about this? Hey, ask this question. Okay, what's happening now? Okay, right? Not to be like a sideline, backseat driver, but I got to be the person that was like, okay, here's the information we need. Here's the information they need. Here's something to think about. Here's the question to ask. She's not a lawyer. She's not a financial advisor. She doesn't know these things. But to have a team member on her side, and because I was hired just by one spouse when they'd already been separated for a couple of years, um, it was to be, hey, here's how to keep this process moving smoothly while you're advocating for yourself and advocating for what's fair and what's all of that. Um, and so, yeah, that's if you can't do the prenup, if that ship has sailed, there is technically a post-nup as well, post-nuptial agreement. I don't know how you could do that.
Yeah.
So that is technically another thing you could do. But even just again, the clarity of doing the work of opening it up and seeing everything together with I'm going to advocate for talking with a financial advisor because having a third party is actually really helpful when it's not just the two of you.
Somebody to take some of the emotional angst out of the air, or in your case, and what I've been able to witness, sit with it and lovingly drive them to look at it together. When I not the financials, I mean the emotional, whatever it exists between them. Look at that.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's the thing, right? I've said it a million times and I will say it over and over again. It's that it's not really about the numbers. It's how you feel about the numbers. That is one of the truest things I have learned over 20 years in this industry. And again, what you said before of like all partnerships will end
One way or the other.
one way or the other. All partnerships will end, and so many people have so much trauma from partnerships ending badly that that didn't have to be. Like, it didn't have to be that way.
Because a lot of times they end badly because of finances. And again, it's not because of the numbers of the finances. It's the emotions around whatever the finances represented inside the relationship.
Yes. Yes, in the case of people building a business together, let's say spouses building a business together again, what's the emotion around the finances? I helped you build this thing. How dare you try to cut me out of it? Valid, 100% valid, right? But boy, that's big. That's a big emotion.
Yeah.
That's, like the anger that can go along with that. Again, valid. Um, but how do we sit with that and have you like be able to hear it,
Yes.
be able to process it and hear each other's side of the story
Yes.
so that you can actually move forward in a way that is actually fair
For both parties.
for both parties. For both parties. Yeah.
What was interesting when you were talking and what kept coming up was and more from like the woman's side, right? And I'm going to say this because as you were talking, like just different conversations about money and going into marriage or some sort of partnership. In every example was a conversation with a woman, and it was kind of like, well, we never in the context of marriage, both I hear both camps, or I've heard both camps. My family and I never talked about prenuptial agreement. That would never be a part of anything we ever did. I would never think about setting up my finances other than being joint with my husband. That's one camp. The other camp is no, I was taught to protect my own. I was taught to get a job that I could take care of myself if anything ever happened. I was taught or driven or whatever conditioned, however you want to talk about it, to be independent, have my own stuff and keep some of the things separate. In your experience, why does that tend to be, or what do you think is the driving force that tends to be a woman's perspective? Like that's those are the conversations women are having
Hmm.
as a, as opposed to men.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So the prevailing societal um, trope, I want to say, is that men have a lot more to lose in a divorce, monetarily, financially, right? And why is that? Um, it's it's less the case now than that was 30, 40 years ago,
Yeah,
maybe
fair.
even 20 to 40 years ago. Um, because women are so much more equal in earning power in the US today than they were, in the definitely in the 90s and the 80s and definitely before the
Right.
80s, right? Like
Right.
certainly. Um, and quite honestly, I mean, women couldn't have a credit card in their own name until 1979. Women
That
couldn't
blows my mind.
right? Right? I was 5 years old at that point. Um, women couldn't
No,
start a
no,
business.
not in 79.
I was
You were
5 oh,
born.
I was minus 5 years old.
I was like, you're in a 5 and 79.
I was not born for another 5 years. There we go. Uh, it's negative 5 years old.
Yeah.
Thank you. Um, my oldest brother was born in 1979, actually. Um, but or 77? I don't know. Doesn't matter. What was I trying to say? But they like we didn't even have the ability to sign a contract for a home. We couldn't purchase a home by ourselves. We couldn't start a business without a man's signature until the 80s, right? I mean, just to truly to truly understand that you and I are in our early to mid 40s right now, and we are the actual first generation of women who never had to get our father's signature to get our first credit card. Like,
Crazy to me.
yeah, you and I both went out and started LLCs all by ourselves. Figured out how to do it, contacted a lawyer, did the paperwork. My husband didn't sign off on that,
Yeah. Yeah. No.
right? I mean, we talked about it and we planned our family around, you know, how we were going to navigate it, but I did that by myself. Same for most of the business ownership, right? But I don't have one business owner who's a woman who had to get a man's signature. Um, but to think that that was not the case for our mothers at our age,
At our
like
age. Yeah.
they couldn't have done that. That's wild. So for, most of most of our history, that was the case, was that men were providing. Men were the ones saving into their 401k or accruing a pension, right? Like whatever that was. And so if they divorced, then yes, their wife who had been managing the home, managing the children, maybe had a job, but it was probably a much lower paying job. She probably did not have retirement savings whatsoever. So yep, got to divide that in half. We are we just really aren't in that societal place anymore. But the narrative and um the initial conversations have not quite, right? Like having the conversation about a prenup, having the conversation about, okay, how do we create our finances together? This is still a fairly new conversation for people to have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just society hasn't quite caught up. The norm hasn't caught up to the actual lived experience of most women in their 40s and younger. And even women in their 50s and 60s and 70s, right? If they do have their own assets, they fought pretty hard for those. because that's just not that wasn't normal. I've talked about this before too. When I meet women who, worked at Goldman Sachs in the 90s, I'm like, "My God, like, thank you."
Right.
Like, how did you survive? Like, I'm proud of you.
Yeah. Yes, girl.
Like, that was some hard stuff to deal with. Um, but yeah, again, women have historically, so even in this, new landscape of women earning the same or more than their spouses, most people have seen these statistics. Most women are still doing more housework and childcare, even if they make more money than
Hmm.
their spouse. Um, and from the financial side, there's still that like conversation of, I do want to say a lot of times it does come more from the woman in a couple, like being like, okay, we need to understand this together. We need to, you know, get, dragging. It's that one's a little bit of a trope too, but I've had that happen before where, the wife is the one like, hey, we need to talk to a financial advisor or a new financial advisor. Um, I need someone who will talk to me, who will understand me and will be able to, have a full conversation, not someone who's just going to spout off numbers and talk directly to my husband and talk to him about numbers and then not talk about anything else. Again, that's a terrible trope that is sadly still in place for a lot of people. But yeah, I mean, we live in an era where things have been changing for our whole lives in our
Yeah.
40s,
Yeah.
and it needs to catch up. The norm needs to catch up to what is actually occurring right now, how things actually work right now. Um, yeah, did that answer your question? I for
Yeah, and absolutely. And I'm also sitting here thinking, right? We talked in the very beginning about, divorce, death, and inheritance. We'll say death slash inheritance, right? And the reason why most people don't want to plan for a divorce is because nobody wants to quote unquote put that out into the universe, right? But moving on to death and inheritance, death will happen. Like none of us are escaping that. So, from your point of view and in all of your experience, what is it that keeps people from dealing with the death part of it? Or, and then on the flip side, the inheritance part of knowing that will happen. What is it that you think is keeping any of us from facing that when we're still able bodied and,
of sound mind.
yeah,
The important
lucid
part.
and to be able to make these decisions versus when tragedy show. Let's just let's there's obviously an anticipated death and then there's a sudden death, right? So the idea of what is keeping us from knowing it unfortunately can happen to anybody when we are able-bodied and in an of sound mind in an objective place that it isn't filled with emotion that keeps us from dealing with.
In my experience, it mostly is the it's like there's a complete emotional block to even considering that could be a thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
that could happen. And it's like it's just another expression of exactly what you said of like, if we talk about it, then I'm like calling it in, right? Like people it's so funny. It's like a um manifestation uh thing, right? Like people, even people who don't think they're very woo woo or whatever it is, they're like, I can't talk about that or it'll happen. I'm like, do you think you can manifest everything that easily?
Yeah. Yeah, no shit, right? Doesn't happen.
Right? So it doesn't quite work that way. Um and then there are all I have also met some people who are very uh woo. I put myself in that camp. I am not woo, right? Like you know that by now. But there are some people who are of that mind of like, I will not even go there because I am gonna call that in. Like that's too far. You've gone to the extreme because you're not even if let's go to that extreme. Even if you are so spiritual and so spiritually in tune that you don't die, instead you dematerialize into spirit form. If you're married, your spouse probably didn't dematerialize with you.
Right.
Your children probably didn't dematerialize with you. Your business partner probably did not. So they will be left to deal with the human on earth consequences of you having uh, ascended to enlightenment
Yeah.
all by yourself.
Yeah.
Right. So even in that case, like no matter where you are on the spectrum of what you think is possible, unless you live as an actual like ascetic monk and own nothing, like literally, unless you own nothing at all, there will be something that someone will have to clean up after.
Yes.
And so if you want to be minimalist, even people who are minimalist, even people who, keep very little, there's still going to be stuff that has to be taken care of. And so from that lens, I mean, it is so interesting that people have that people feel so strongly that even talking about death, talking about how they would want to be remembered, any of that like elicits this reaction of, I can't even think about it or talk about it, or like this emotional reaction. In the case of um, my dad and his wife when he passed away, that was the case. I had mentioned it many times. This is something that you need to do. I didn't force the issue because I didn't feel like that was my place either. Um, but it was like emotionally like couldn't even engage with the conversation. And because of the way that ended up going and the pain that it caused me and my brothers, my parents have been divorced for a long time, about 20 years. Um, my mom has been single on her own, but seeing the pain that caused me and my brothers through that process, she was like, I have to get this taken care of. She's not married. She doesn't have a plan. She's like, I don't want to get married again. I'm like, good for you, mom. Um, but she didn't want anything like that to happen for us. And she has stuff to protect. She she has really like found her way and like been able to like build something for herself differently than she ever was able to while my parents were married, and she wanted to protect that. And so she went through the whole process of putting a trust together, getting all of her documents signed, healthcare power of attorney, financial power of attorney, all of the basic documents. And she has a business, she has a home, so put it in a trust. And that for her was like, she is definitely on the woo side, right, and spiritual, and it's like she's not calling anything in. It just now it's everything is in writing.
Yeah.
It's all documented.
Mhm.
Same for my husband's parents recently. They had their stuff like half done for I don't almost a decade probably. Finally, they got it done. A lot of times this does tend to be a catalyst. It does happen because they heard of a friend or a relative or someone else who had to go through a very difficult, sometimes traumatizing estate settlement or non-estate settlement, or see someone that they love get really hurt because documents weren't filed, right? Like that's the thing with all of this is like a simple will package with the documents you need is usually less than $1,000, a lot of times less than 500. It's not a big expense if you go for a trust. If you need a trust, if your estate is big enough that it warrants that, or it's complex enough, or you have young children, or whatever the case may be, a trust is usually a couple $1,000s,
Yeah.
2 to 4 maybe.
Yeah.
In most places, it's in that grand scheme of things to think that, like, your children or your grandchildren or your nephews or your nieces or someone you love is hurting because documents weren't put in place, like, that sucks. And so for me, as right, like, from my side as the financial advisor, it's my, um if I get a new client in and they don't have those documents in place and they have young children who are under age 18, that is, like, top priority number 1 recommendation. Like, before we do anything else with your money, you need to have guardianship provisions in place. We need to have these conversations right now. That's the most important thing you can do.
Yeah. And to actually follow through, right, is that you can have the documents, right? The documents can be drafted, they can be set in place. If you've not done anything to fund them, and for anybody who's unfamiliar, yeah, unfamiliar with that, like, you have your trust, you have your state documents, and specifically you have a trust, you then have to put everything into the trust. The trust has to be named as the beneficiary on retirement assets, on a house,
Life insurance.
your insurance, your cars, your everything. And if you don't do that, you have a very expensive piece of paper.
Right. Yes.
And the idea that, and this is something that's very personal to me. This is something that I've had experience with, and that my ex-husband and I, we actually created an estate and a trust. We had all the things, and we actually never did anything with it. Right? We never made the the actions to fund it, because it was like, oh yeah, we'll get to it, we'll get to it. Well, then we got divorced, and that trust is now null and void. But in the midst of that divorce, I had to watch my sister mourn the tragic death of her husband. And the first thing she said to me when we were alone was, I don't know what I'm going to do. We didn't have a will. We didn't have anything. First words out of her mouth. One, heartbroken. I mean, I was already like, uh, beside myself. Just one, having heard the news about my brother-in-law. Two, seeing my sister an hour later. Three, when she was finally out of the hospital, to have that words come out of her mouth. And my first thought was, we will figure it out. You do whatever you need to do. I'm here to help you figure this out. And over the last, what has it now been? 7 months, probably, I think. We're knocking on 7 months. The stuff that she has had to go through, and quite honestly, yes, while it was complicated, it could have been way more complicated. And actually, I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth here, listener. It wasn't terrible that they didn't have anything set up in place, because she was still they were obviously still married. However, the circumstance was, had something happened to both of them, because they were both in an accident, and unfortunately my brother-in-law did not make it, and thankfully my sister did, it would have been a nightmare for their two children, who are adults. They are over 18.
Young adults, though.
Yes, yeah, yes. I was going to say not much over 18. But it would have been really, really tough. And to watch my sister, make these decisions now of like, yes, we will have an estate plan, we will have a trust, we will have all of these things. So that, having been through that, she now can set it up so that her sons will feel more secure, because their mother took the actions to do this in the aftermath of this. But it also prompted me, okay, well, my first trust is now null and void, but now it's only me. Right. And I sat there and thought, oh, I'm not doing this to my kids. I am not going to make them having to figure this out all by themselves. And, thankfully, because their father and I are no longer together, it would probably just be one of something happened to just me, right? So they would still have their father, which would is amazing. But to put it on somebody else to figure out all of my stuff, and it was like to the point of like calling something in, I feel so much better that I now have documents that yes, I have funded everything, so it's not just an expensive piece of paper, right? I can share my binder with anybody who wants to see it, right? Um, but I feel so secure of like, oh, my kids will be taken care of. I literally have a binder that spells out everything that I want and where everything goes, and I am a minimalist. I don't have a ton of stuff. And I've already sat down with my children who are 15 and 12 and said, "What of mine do you want?" And it's written down on the piece of paper. Like when I say want, like what of mine do you want? I mean like the teeny tiny one.
Tangible,
Yeah,
yeah, in the
like
middle.
tangible assets. And I've had that conversation with them. And my boys, and while they're still young, I can feel the sense of like, I don't have to deal with it. I can feel their sense of safety that they know that I've set it up so that if something does happen to me, one, they will be taken care of financially. Two, there is custodianship, obviously my ex-husband. And then if anything were to happen to him, I have backups. So I feel the opposite of like, I'm not calling it in. I'm actually staving it off because this is in place. Like that's my mentality. It's like, no, 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 we're good now. We got this little bubble.
Well, and what you're describing is genuinely how most people feel when they get through the process. There is almost inevitably that it's just like, "Oh, I didn't realize that that felt so stressful." You're like that you're holding on to anxiety about that
Yes.
unknowingly, and that when you finally, like, when it's done and it's signed and the things are funded, you're like, "Oh, god, that feels so good."
Now all I need to do is go find all of my passwords to everything that I have and
Yeah,
write
right.
that down. But hey, you know what? If the least of if that is the biggest concern that somebody's got to reset a password, okay, cool. Just take
Right.
my fingerprint with you wherever you need to go. I don't know. Take my eye wherever you need to go.
It's just my face. Real creepy. No, it's so true, and that is, again, it's what I see most is that people finally feel like, you know what? A big one tends to be around guardian. If you have younger
Guardian.
kids,
Yes.
18 or younger, it tends to be around guardianship. And it's like, we had this conversation when the kids were little, and I wanted my sister and he wanted his mom, and we couldn't agree. And then it didn't feel good. So we just stopped talking about it. Yeah. Okay. Well, we got to have the conversation.
Yes.
Right. And then, but because then when I present it again, I'm like, okay, well, they're what, 5 and 7 now. So if you don't choose, the state chooses. They literally will go into foster care, even if it's for a day or a week or 2 weeks until they can sort out who should get the kids. And usually those are the only words I have to say for people to be like, "Okay, but we have to decide and write this down." Yeah, you
Yeah.
do.
Yes.
You really do, because if you don't have it written down and it's not somewhere. So, in the case with my clients too, like, I usually get a copy of their documents. Almost every single client I have a copy of their documents in our safe, secure file system, because I on their documents too, whether it's one of them that passes or if they both pass away and someone else has to get their documents, I'm one of the first, like, call
Yep.
list,
Yep.
right? Like, call my financial advisor. She'll be able to tell you what to do next. I can help with that. I can say, "Yeah, we have the documents here. This is what was wanted. This is what was who's on there." Like, those kids do not go to foster care. They do not
Yes.
go, they go straight to grandma or they go straight to sister.
Yes. And listener out there, just as a piece of mind, if you're considering or you want to consider this as when working with an estate attorney, make sure that they mention the connection to your financial advisor. That's when you know you have a good estate attorney, is when
Yes.
they understand the connection between your estate and your financial planner. If they're not, then open up your mouth and say, hey, how does this work with my financial planner? And to be an advocate for yourself while you're here and while you're of sound mind and in an objective state of what could happen or what needs to happen in the event that something does happen. So,
Such a good point because like you alluded to before, you can have all these documents in place, but if you don't make the trust the beneficiary of your life insurance or of your accounts, which again, like of IRAs, that's a conversation. You
yes.
need to have a conversation with your financial advisor about if your trust should be the beneficiary of your IRA accounts or your 401k. That's that is a nuanced conversation.
Yes.
We'll just leave it there. I won't go deeper. Have a conversation about that. Um, but like you said, it doesn't do anything if it's not funded. If your house doesn't go into the trust, if different aspects like the estate attorneys in general, they draft documents. They have to be well written. They have to be enforceable. All of those things, right? Super important. The financial advisor is usually the one that actually like that's the on the ground person. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where the document turns into this we have to do something with it. It's the financial advisor figuring out the calculation for the QDRO in a divorce. Who gets what? Okay, the lawyers wrote it down. Now it's the finance people that have to figure out the actual division. It's the finance people that have to figure out, okay, it goes to this type of account and you need to have that set up. We need to be able to receive it. We need to be able to invest it. The way that they work together is, again, one without the other isn't a full complete system. And even in the process of, thinking of this other prospect where, they were married and they also had built some big businesses together and now dividing assets, not having a financial advisor there during that process to advocate for each one of them separately, to look at what was going on, to ask those questions really cost a lot.
Hmm.
Very honestly, it cost literal dollars on the other side of this was not executed as well as it could have been because there wasn't a financial advisor standing there like saying, okay, here's what I see. This doesn't make sense to me. Like let's ask about that and make sure it's the same across the board. That's the that's the truth of it is like in those hard moments. And this is again going back to the original prompt. Why don't we talk about this? When we talk about death and divorce and all these hard things is because it's so um unique,
Hmm. Yeah.
right? There's no one size fits all. There's no checklist that we can create that's going to get you 100% of the way there. And it's just sometimes that can make it feel overwhelming so that we don't even want to touch the subject, right? So it's like ugh, it's like I don't know what it's going to be like, so why would I plan for it? Like that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah. And you're right. We can't make a checklist because everything is so nuanced and so individualized. And, while some are easier than others, they're all complicated. However, there are big chunks of things that you can start to do. And part of that is talking to someone like you and our team we can at least start you down a path. We can get you on the path so that it doesn't feel as overwhelming. But yes, it will feel overwhelming. That is inevitable. There is no getting around it. Whether it is divorce, it's death, it's inheritance. You can anticipate the death, or it's a sudden death, or same with divorce, right? There are ways to get you on the path to it, so that the overwhelm doesn't consume you, but you have a place to start and you have a place to navigate and a support system to help you through it.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And again, tying it back to whether it's personal, your marriage or a parent or, someone close to you, um, or it's business, your business partner suddenly passes away, you didn't have your succession planning done, right? That's one of the biggest reasons that we advocate for these conversations. While you're of sound mind, that's actually a really, really important part. I would say that's one of the other triggers that gets people to finally have these conversations is that, a grandparent did not have things done or they were done literally 50 years ago and now they can't update it because they're in the very deep throes of dementia or in the hospital and on a ventilator and they can't, right? And then suddenly you're like, "Oh god, like this was supposed to have been fixed. I kept putting it off, I kept putting it off, I kept putting it off." And now like they literally cannot sign a paper. That is another one, the heartbreaking one that happens, that we have to, it's like, yeah, that's why we don't wait. So hopefully, my hope is that, if you're listening to this, that that's not the case and you're not dealing with that specifically. Um, but if it is, or if that has happened, or if you have seen that happen, like let that be like the warning sign that it's meant to be, that big, red flag that like, hey, this can happen. It does happen. We don't have to dwell on it, but once you get it done, it's good. And it's my job again, if I'm your financial advisor, it's my job to be like, okay, every 5 years or so, or if a big life event changes, like, hey, did we put that in the estate documents? That's the job of having someone who you work with on an ongoing basis to help you keep those things up to date. Not, it's not always on your plate to always be like, oh, what I have to worry about this all the time and babysit. No, no, you don't. But Lauren, I think you were also getting to, and we'll wrap it up here. I think we were going to tell people about where we do have a
Yeah.
broad checklist. You want to tell them
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah. So absolutely. So, Hannah and I, well, Hannah really is kind of the expertise of, look, dealing with other people's money. That's your expertise. And so created a checklist, for significant wealth events, whether it is the selling of a business, inheritance, or divorce, right? These significant events, and we have a guide. We have a broad checklist that helps kind of get you on the path so that if you're dealing with this situation, you have the opportunity to at least have something in front of you to reduce a little bit of the overwhelm, and to kind of set you on the path. And so, looking at that, can be the significant wealth event guide. And you can get that at x2wealthplanning.com. And if you sign up and submit your email, you'll be sent that right away. And it's a beautiful guide that outlines each of those steps, whether it is a divorce, inheritance, or a selling of the business, whichever one applies to you, go straight there, hone in on it, and, start executing on some of the, I'll say, simple steps. They're simple and straightforward, but as you get a little bit deeper, they could be slightly more complicated. And that's where reaching out to Hannah or our team can support you in working through those.
Yeah, absolutely. It was fun. It was a labor of love
Yeah.
to do that. We
Yeah.
created the web page first, and it was great. And I was like, it needs more, needs a little bit more meat to it. And then I think you mentioned the checklist, and I was like, yeah, of
Yeah.
course. A checklist in the sense of like, what are some of the questions that you can ask? What are some of the documents that you might need to grab? What are, again, those broad things of like, okay, let's getting you ready for the conversations that you need to have, um, is what that's for. Because again, literally could not make a checklist for what all the things to do for a divorce or all the things to do for when someone's passed away, um, or all the things when you're, dismantling a business, whatever that is. selling a business, shutting it down, whatever's happening. There's no way to have a comprehensive checklist for either of those, any of those. But we can have the broad stuff that's going to help you start the conversation. So um, that link will be in the show notes too. You can go over there. We're super excited about it. Super happy about the website redesign and all of that, and really communicating and helping our listeners understand the link between Expansive CEO and X Squared Wealth Planning. That this is the place. Expansive CEO is where we teach, where we nurture, where we give you the information really to take, to chew on, to consider, and help you know when it's time to have those conversations, whether that's an X squared or Expansive CEO. But yeah, they're linked, they are intertwined forever. They were created one out of the other. All of these things.
Yes.
Right? So,
Yes.
well, that was a I think that was a good discussion, at least around especially divorce and death and why we don't want to talk about them and inheritance and all these things. Um, and we'll keep going. These interesting. I kind of want to talk about it. We'll see. We've been pulling some different astrological natal charts and synastry charts and things like that. And like, how do you why do different relationships feel different, money wise?
Yes.
And then you look at sometimes you just look at the energy between two people and be like, oh, okay.
I see
I
it now.
see. I see
Yeah.
why that feels that way. So yeah, maybe we'll share a little bit of that next time too. More of a back to our woo side a little bit more. This was very, very like tactical, strategic.
Yes. Look,
Back to the woo, please.
you need both. You need both sides of the spectrum. Very logical and very will. They both serve a purpose.
Exactly. Well, thank you for being here. Check out the new X Squared website if you're so inclined, X numeral 2 wealthplanning.com. Check us out on Substack. We've got, articles that come out. I just posted an article recently, the 20 things I've learned in 20 years in finance. You can go check out that article. And pretty soon we'll have a big announcement for Substack as well. So
Yes. 23 days.
stay tuned. Stay tuned for that fun. Thanks for being here, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Hey, friends.